I would like to welcome everyone here to what is one of the best, if not really the best, days of the year in the life of the Strauss Center. And it's when we all come together to hear about what our wonderful Crook Fellows have done with their Crook Fellowships over the summer and share their incredible experiences with us. And so this is really one of the best days every year in the life of the Strauss Center. Now, the extraordinary presentations you're going to hear today were made possible by one exceptional person. She's one of the Strauss Center's dearest friends. I would like to thank her personally for all that she does for the center and for the school and for the larger world. She's a remarkable person. Please join me in thanking Eleanor Crook for all she does for us. What you're going to hear today is all made possible by her vision, her commitment, her generosity to the center and school. So thank you so much for all you do. As many of you know, the William H. Crook Program in International Affairs is dedicated to promoting global economic development and fighting poverty. The program honors William H. Crook, a pioneer in global development. Now, recognizing his impact on the fight in poverty, the Crook Fellowship sponsor graduate students working for nonprofit organizations in developing countries. Since its inception in 2008, the Crook Fellowships have sponsored and supported 21 student fellows engaged in cutting-edge work to improve the economic, social, and educational opportunities in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. You can see more about these projects the alumni have done on our Strauss Center website. It truly is remarkable. The students have returned from their experiences abroad with new insights about life in the developing world, the appropriateness of various types of development aid, and advice for fellow students interested in working in the field. Now, we had a new wrinkle this year that I think was particularly exciting and was established by our senior program coordinator, Laura Jones, who does amazing work in putting this all together. The students actually kept a blog of their experiences throughout the summer, which was really fun for us to follow all of their experiences, and I would highly recommend that you check it out. It's called the Thinker and Doers blog, a perfect name to reflect all the great work they do in the Crook Fellowship, and you should take a look. As you will see, their work is remarkable, and please join me in both welcoming and thanking this year's class of Crook's Fellow winners as they present their research and their summer experiences to us. Thank you. Our first presenter will be Adriana Campos.
So this summer I worked for Cultural Survival in Guatemala, working on their community radio station project. Community radio stations are located across Guatemala, primarily in Mayan-speaking communities, and there are about between 500 to 1,000 stations. There isn't really any reliable data, and Cultural Survival works with about 200 radio stations through its partnership with 7 regional networks. And here, actually, I'm at a radio station being interviewed for like about 5 minutes in an indigenous community called Zumpango, Guatemala, which was a great experience. So you might be wondering why or how community radio contributes to development in Guatemala. I think there are 3 intertwining ways in which this happens. I think community radio stations have promoted the cultural revitalization of indigenous communities in Guatemala. They also promote community development, and they have been democratizing speech, which in Spanish I think sounds better. It's democratizando la palabra. So these stations operate as nonprofits. They're run primarily by volunteers. They provide educational and cultural programming, and importantly, they do this in the native languages of the communities. So commercial radio in Guatemala is dominated by Spanish language, and it tends to focus on Western capitalist values, which don't really provide any educational or cultural value to these communities, especially since many of these communities are marginalized and isolated from the urban mestizo elite. And so by broadcasting these socio-cultural programs in the languages of the people, the radios have been promoting the social capital of the communities, empowering the communities to understand their rights and also to mobilize in favor of this movement. And the networks that Cultural Survival has partnered with have formed this movement called the Movimiento Nacional de Medios de Comunicación Comunitaria, or National Movement of Community Media, to lobby for the passage of a bill that would essentially regulate community radio stations, because at the moment they aren't actually legal. They're referred to by commercial radio stations as radio piratas, which is pirate radios. This is because Guatemala essentially privatized the rights to radio frequencies in the 1990s, and they did this by auctioning them at really high prices that made it impossible for little community radio stations in the mountains to get access to these frequencies. So we're lobbying for this bill to get passed so that the government will actually recognize these stations as legitimate, because they've also been subject to police raids, and they've also been shut down a few times. So they're working to get this done, and this is actually really relevant to what I did this summer. For the most part, I was lobbying the Guatemalan Congress with the movement's leaders to get this bill passed. So most of my time was spent in Guatemala City. And this was a pretty interesting experience. The bill has not yet passed in Congress. They're not really sure when it'll happen. Hopefully it will happen this year. It might be next year. And related to this, I also researched the regulations of other Latin American countries in terms of community radio. It's a pretty nascent, or it's not very well established yet, but I focused on Colombia and Venezuela and looked at how they handled different areas of community radio, like program content or program evaluation and community and citizen participation. And I presented this report to my boss and to the movement's leaders. So hopefully once this bill gets passed, this will actually help them in terms of implementing the legislation. And I also, my other responsibility was to assist with the fundraising and project development efforts of Cultural Survival. So I worked on some grant writing, and I also helped with a project funded by the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights. And I also met with some local academic institutions to see if we could get like a study abroad internship type program going, but nothing has been established yet. And I also had the chance to visit some of the stations, so I got a pretty good sense of what these, like the volunteers and the staff think of their work. And I talked with several directors, and it was pretty inspiring, and it was good to get away from the capital. So what did I learn this summer? It was really interesting for me to work with the social movement. I was able to get a good grasp of what this movement faces in Guatemala in terms of political capital. It's really hard to talk about social issues with policymakers who tend to be guided by other interests. But I mean, I was also inspired by the fact that this movement has been able to gain a lot of community support, and a lot of people really believe in the power of this media. And at the same time, I was also able to see that this movement faces a lot of challenges in terms of like getting financial resources and getting people who really understand things like program evaluation, which was really interesting. And that sort of goes along with the political, am I done? Okay. The political realities that impact policymaking and social movement interests in Guatemala. I think overall it was very clear to me that there isn't a lot of common ground yet between the top down and the bottom up in Guatemala, and I think that has a lot of implications for policymaking in terms of development in Guatemala, since the government seems to be, rhetorically, they promote this image of socioeconomic development, but the reality is really different. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Knopner-Butis, and this summer I interned in Cajamarca, Peru with Discover Hope Fund, which is a small microcredit NGO that's actually based in Austin, so if any of you are looking for some local development opportunities while you're attending school, I'd recommend that you look into them. So I actually started interning with Discover Hope Fund in the spring doing research for them, and then over the summer I visited their microcredit site in Cajamarca, Peru. And on this site they have a community center, which you can see pictured on the left, where they give classes and trainings for the women who are receiving loans. So they have what is called a microcredit plus model. Not only do they give loans, but they also try to provide training and opportunities for personal development to the women. So on the left, there's a picture of me with some women who are taking a doll making class. So one of the things we teach them is craft making skills that they can learn to use and hopefully develop into a skill that they can market. And another thing we do is, aside from marketable skills, we try to provide like personal development skills. So on the right is actually a picture from a leadership workshop we did. We had a series of 3 leadership workshops in a rural town outside of Cajamarca, where we tried to teach the women about ideas like teamwork and communication and how every person can be a leader in their own right. So this exercise is actually one that I came up with and I think is pretty awesome, where you take gumdrops and toothpicks and you try to make a tower with your team and try to make the tallest tower possible, which is basically a fun way to have people think about how teamwork works, how communication works, how implicit leaders will arise in group situations. So those were some of the things I did. So aside from facilitating classes and supporting the programming, I also worked a lot with our program partner, Multicredit, who is a Peruvian financial institution who basically provided the loans for the women. So while Discover Hope Fund, I interned with them doing community classes, I also worked extensively with their partner doing more loan-oriented things, which meant I attended loan repayment meetings, formation meetings of new village banks that were being created, information sessions they had in communities that were interested in forming village banks, and end-of-cycle meetings where banks had come to the end of their 5-month loan cycle and had to evaluate themselves about how they did and decide whether they wanted to then enter a second loan cycle, take out new loans at a higher value, and continue on. So another service that Multicredit provided was business assessment for the women. So in every loan repayment meeting, which happens once a month, we would try to set aside about half an hour for the women to receive some kind of talk about business skills. It would be things that, like customer service or how to market your business, things that are actually very useful skills and might seem like common sense to some. But for these women, I think it was very helpful for them to talk it through in a comfortable setting in their homes and address these topics in a way that was specifically tailored to their businesses. So we would talk about, well, how can you improve your customer service if you're someone who buys and resells livestock? This is a totally different type of customer service and marketing than, you know, bigger businesses would be. So here's some more pictures. On the left is a woman who's taking a knitting class, and it's pretty cute. They used to bring their kids a lot to classes. And on the right is a literacy class, which is something I was actually very heavily involved with, because we had Discover Hope tries to provide the types of classes that are of most interest to women. So when women say, you know, I'd be really interested in improving my literacy, because I only went to school until I was 10 years old. So we would try to provide for that need by setting up literacy classes. And we had had these classes going on for a few months now, but we hadn't really figured out a good way to track the progress of the students to see if they were getting out of it what they wanted to get out of it. So one of the things I did was I helped them design a monitoring tool to see what the women's goals were, if they were making progress on their goals over a series of months, and a test that they could take at the end of like 3 months to see if they had made progress. So that was just one small example of how I started to develop larger skills, such as how to do evaluation for NGOs. And this is a picture of one of our most newly formed village banks on the day that they, you know, created their bylaws and elected their leaders. So those are some of the things that I did in this internship, and I think although I was working in very specific projects, I ended up learning a lot of larger skills that will be applicable to my future work in the field of international development. And if anybody has any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them in the session after everyone presents.
Hi, my name is Blake Messer. I also work for Discover Hope Fund. So like Amy said, Discover Hope Fund is based in Austin and works in Cajamarca, Peru. Occasionally we ask the microloan recipients that are part of our organization what sort of courses they would like to have available to them. And over the last year or so, they've started requesting computer literacy courses because computers are much cheaper now in the developing world. And it's often the case that employment opportunities will get passed up, or short-term employment opportunities will get passed up because they don't have any computer skills. And so my mission in Cajamarca was to develop a computer literacy course that would be useful to microloan recipients, in the hopes that if it was particularly useful in this site, that it could be generalized and provided as a resource to other microcredit organizations. So the premise, I guess, is that by providing access or skills to use computers, that people will have access to free information and as a result access to more opportunities. So I created 2 curricula, a basic level computation course for women who have never taken, who have never used a keyboard before, who have never interacted with a computer before, and then a slightly more advanced intermediate course. The curriculum design was tuned to microloan recipients in particular, such that it was as relevant as possible to their lives and businesses. Each woman who was a part of the Discover Hope Fund's organization has her own small business, and so I tried to build in individual exercises so that their businesses could be, so that they would find the computer skills that they were developing as useful as possible for their businesses. As far as evaluation goes, I set it up so that each student takes 2 evaluations. One at the very end of the course to measure their expectations for how useful they think that their new computer skills will be for them over the coming months. And then another one 3 months later to measure how often they actually ended up using these skills as resources. And so the premise here is that Discover Hope Fund will share these resources with other organizations if it turns out that the courses were extremely useful. And so I already have results from the first couple of classes that ended already, and so far women were for me it was optimistic, because women reported that they think that the skills were going to be extremely useful to them in the coming months. It was clear to me that they could see uses for the skills that they were developing, not only for their small businesses, but also to help their children with their homework and to connect to each other better. So that was my summary.
Hello everyone, I'm Pace Phillips. And this summer I interned with Finca International in Zambia. So Finca is a microcredit organization that gives loans to small business owners, like these ones. So like other microcredit organizations, Finca's borrowers are organized in groups, which they call village banks. And so generally these are groups of 10 to 15 people who individually get loans, but then are collectively responsible for paying those loans back. And with Finca, the starting loans start at $40 as the smallest loan, and they go up to a few $1,000s. And so in Zambia, there's about 18% of people are employed in the formal sector. So that leaves 82% there that are doing something else. So the vast majority are small business owners or entrepreneurs of some sort. So there's a really big market for microcredit. So what I did this summer is, along with 2 other students from the U.S., we carried out extensive surveys of Finca's clients in Zambia. So we were asking questions about the client's living situation, how much their daily expenditures were, their assets, what type of business they had, their loans, and what they thought about Finca's services. So to do these surveys, we hired 3 Zambian translators, and that's one of them there. So we hired these translators, and pretty soon, at first they were translating for us, but pretty soon we got them to start giving the surveys on their own. So they would give the surveys to people who only spoke the local languages, and we would give them to give the interviews to the clients that spoke English. And so over the 9 weeks that we were there, we went to 6 different cities and conducted over 600 interviews. And so so on a daily basis, usually what I would do is I would go out with my translator, and we would go to markets on the outskirts of these cities. So these are kind of makeshift markets, open air, real dusty. And we'd go to the village bank meetings and meet these Finca clients, and we would pick the ones that we had randomly selected and then conduct interviews. And often these interviews usually took about 45 minutes each, but they could take as much as 2 hours, just depending on how chatty the person was and how much they had to say. But through this process, I learned a lot about microcredit, and also a lot about microcredit operations on the ground and the informal economy in Zambia. And so Finca was interested in doing this research for a number of reasons. One is that the research we were doing is a baseline study. So in 2 years from now, other researchers will go back and find the same clients and ask them the same questions to see what changes happened over time. Another reason they were interested in doing this research is to get a better idea of their clients, so they can assess their clients' needs and then develop financial products that can better serve them. And then lastly, it makes the organization more accountable and transparent to its donors. So by knowing what type of population it serves, it can see if they're targeting the right population, and also if they're loaning to the people who they tell donors they're loaning to. So this is a picture of one of the Finca clients, and I was just amazed by the different types of things these small business owners did. So this guy's making a charcoal stove from scratch out of sheet metal. So we had people all the way from selling charcoal to people who are involved in import-export businesses. So I think in the West, or in the U.S., we have the misconception that Africa really has a lack of trade and commerce. But there in the informal sector, it's extremely active. And it's an extremely competitive sector, and then also surprisingly international, too. I was really surprised by these small business owners, how many traveled outside of the country to buy their goods. Many of them traveled just to neighboring countries, but then a lot travel as far as Dubai or Bangkok or Bombay to buy goods. And these aren't big international business people. We're talking about single African women who don't have a high school education or just have a small stall in an outdoor market, and they're traveling to Bombay to negotiate with factory owners to buy blankets or whatever goods it is they sell and bring those back to Zambia. So there's a lot of surprises there. But so mostly the tangible skill that I really got out of this summer is how to conduct large-scale research and survey-based research. I really gained a lot there in addition to learning about microcredit. So after we completed these interviews, the last week we spent in Lusaka analyzing the data we collected, and then we gave presentations to the Finca Zambia office and then also Finca International in the headquarters office in Washington, D.C. So I guess with that, I would just like to thank the Strauss Center and Eleanor Crook for providing me with this opportunity.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Allison. I'm going to talk about the work that I did this summer with COFAMIDE and Save the Children in El Salvador. As is common with many small Latin American organizations, they have a meaningless acronym that doesn't really tell anything about their work, but COFAMIDE stands for Committee of Family Members of Migrants Who Have Died or Disappeared. So after the Tamaulipas massacre in late August, where 72 migrants were killed, this issue kind of came to more attention on the international media. But migrants, specifically Central American migrants traveling through Mexico, suffer countless incidents of kidnap, assault, rape, and death. So back in El Salvador, these migrants end up being disappeared because their family members don't know what happened to them. They don't know if they're alive, if they made it, if they're the victim of some kind of human trafficking situation. So this is one of our members, Niña Inez. She is looking for her daughter, Sandra, who disappeared in 2004. As of right now, we don't know what happened to her, but this is an example of one of the members of COFAMIDE and the people that I worked with this summer. So COFAMIDE has been an organization since 2006. They came together in part to lobby the Salvadoran and Mexican governments to pay more attention to this issue, to get the issue of Central American migrant rights in Mexico on the agenda in some way, and also really to do the work that the Salvadoran government was not doing of actually looking for these people. They constructed a network of human rights organizations in Mexico and are in contact with them trying to figure out, did you see this person, what happened to this person, which a lot of times is like searching for a needle in a haystack, but nevertheless they're actually doing this work that the Salvadoran government has failed to do. And Save the Children is involved in this because they're a financial donor, they're a sponsor of COFAMIDE through their human trafficking component. That's one of the things they work on in El Salvador. And so I was coordinating with Save the Children on the activities that I would be doing as part of my internship before I went down. And basically when I got there, everything changed, which is also very common in these kinds of situations. But basically things changed because the organization's needs changed. Suddenly when I arrived, they were going through kind of this rapid growth. They had been struggling a little bit for a while, and then suddenly a lot of donors were getting interested in El Salvador. And we started working on a project with Catholic Relief Services. We were involved with a project with a group of forensic anthropologists from Argentina. And the government actually, new government that came into power in 2009, started to take a more heavy interest in this issue as well. So all those things kind of came up at once, and as a result, I did a lot of project administration. The project with Catholic Relief Services required a lot of oversight. Maybe to preface all this, I should say that no one in COFAMIDE works for a salary. They're all volunteers. They're all doing this because they're personally committed to it. So it was really a privilege and a luxury for me through the Crook Fellowship to be able to be there working full-time. And as a result, I worked long hours and I worked hard, and I had to do a lot of things from, just handling basically the projects, basically the paperwork, organizing people, making sure things got done. Also kind of working on new project proposals, with the organizations that I was talking about, just kind of making sure those project proposals were drafted and sent out and edited and whatnot. Donor coordination, because as I mentioned, there's Save the Children, there's CRS, and there's a lot of different people, a lot of different ways of handling things. So I was in contact with all of those different organizations trying to make sure that things got done. In terms of communications, GoFundMe, like I mentioned, everyone that's there is there because they have a personal connection and they want to work hard and do something, but they don't have a lot of strategy, experience, et cetera. So we're trying to figure out how to get our message out. And so that was a big part of what I did. And also accompaniment basically means that I assisted all the events and did a lot of work outside of the office as well. So it was a busy summer. And some of the things I took away, working with a very small organization can definitely be a challenge. It made me kind of want to sign up for the conflict resolution portfolio because there were a lot of times when I felt like that would be a great skill. Amy's leadership workshops would have been really helpful. So there were a lot of different things going on there. And also the fact that they were kind of in transition, they were growing a little bit faster than maybe we were ready for, which was exciting, but at the same time it was an interesting situation. And then something I felt particularly the importance of sustainability. I was there for a short period of time and I was doing a lot of the work. And I tried to do things in a systematic way that could be replicated and copied, but with so much going on, it was hard to do that. So I really saw that that's a really important concern. And then lastly, donor coordination is complicated, like I mentioned. But it was a really exciting time. It's a really exciting time for this organization. And I was really thankful and felt very privileged to have the chance to work there. So thank you.
So my name is Ariel Schwartz, and I worked this summer in Kenya on behalf of my own organization, Maria's Libraries, which supports a network of public libraries in Kenya. And the point here is that there are lots and lots of, well, there are modern libraries in Kenya, but there are also lots of very small, isolated libraries in Kenya, as well as lots of community-based and international non-governmental organizations devoted to libraries, aid organizations and government organizations devoted to literacy and promoting a reading culture. So our point of entry is really to focus on collaboration among these organizations. So I guess in development speak, this is really a harmonization exercise. And we do this through 3 areas: networking libraries, promoting a reading culture, and building and resourcing libraries. I'm not going to focus on the infrastructure so much, but we can talk about it later if you're interested. Primarily, I was working on advancing our building project and moving our citizen archivist project from a planning stage to an implementation stage. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. I just want to talk about our partner libraries a little bit. We work with the library in Lamu. This is on the Muslim coast. There are lots of dialects of Swahili spoken here. Elangarawas is in Masailand. Kibera is a library that we work with in Nairobi in the slum area. Ahero is about an hour and a half outside of Kisumu, which is the 3rd largest city in Kenya. And they're actually, this is a picture of an empty piece of land. They're actually planning to build a library soon. And we got started in Busia, Kenya, which is right on the Ugandan border. And you can see that, well, there's no roads on this map, but there's a road directly from the port at Mombasa through Nairobi all the way to Busia and into the hinterland. So it's a major trucking route, and I'll show you a couple pictures of Busia, but it's a very busy area with lots of economic activity and not a lot of resources. So as I mentioned, I was working primarily to set up this citizen archivist project, advance our building projects, and work on some fundraising activities. This is not so clear, but this is a party that we organized in collaboration with the Friends of the Busia Community Library to raise funds for the construction of a new library in Busia, which was sort of an experiment for us because part of what we're focusing on is developing local philanthropy in Kenya in support of a library system. There's almost every time you turn on the news, there's discussion about how important a reading culture is there and how important libraries are. But there's not a very entrenched system of donating and giving back to one's own community. So we focused on a group of what we call impats in Nairobi, and these are people who are from Busia, who are young professionals or older professionals who have done well for themselves, and we talk about giving back to their community. And we did this through personal connections, but also through M-Pesa, which is an interesting cash transfer system through the mobile phone technology, which we developed. Well, we didn't develop the M-Pesa, but we worked on including that as a strategy for fundraising, because there's very little system of credit in Kenya and very little culture of payments online. So we couldn't really raise funds that way. This is a picture of one of the local publishers that we're partnered with, Yambeka Kids, donating some books to the Maria Wafulu, who's the head of the library management in Busia. I'm going to skip right through this. Another group of people that we were trying to target for developing this local philanthropy culture was a group of young library science students in Nairobi. So, I should rush to do this. So, I made a presentation to a large group of them in Nairobi, and we generated a lot of Facebook friends from it. I don't know if we'll generate any money from it, but at least they were interested. I'm going to skip through that and just talk very briefly about our Citizen Archivist project. This is a cultural exchange program and a cultural preservation program that we're working with in 4 libraries in Kenya, Lamu, Busia, Kibera, and Elangalawas. These are, as I showed you on the map, very far apart from each other in reasonably culturally distinct areas from each other. And this is our pilot project, which is going to be our main tool to interpersonally network these libraries. So right now, they are collecting all sorts of interviews, digital photography, and audio interviews to try and record what daily life looks like in their town. And we have collections from 2, and we're waiting from 2 maybe in the next week. And then in January, after everything is translated from all their different languages, Swahili, Ma, Sheng, Luo, Luya, and some in English, we're going to have them meet and develop some interlibrary exchange program around what they've collected. I have so much more to tell you, but I think that's enough.
Hello, my name is Sachin, and I was at the Gujarat Institute of Development Research in Ahmedabad, India this summer. And Gujarat is the westernmost state in India along the southern border of Pakistan. The institute itself is in Ahmedabad, which is the 6th largest city in India. My project area, however, was in a farming region in the volcanic mountains on the eastern side of Gujarat. And little did I know once I got there that it's an extremely controversial area. One reason is because that's where the farmer suicide epidemic was going on. And number 2 is these are all displaced tribal farmers. Because the central government of India wanted to build a dam called Narmada Dam in the middle of the state. So they were displaced over to this particular region. And what I was working on was what's called the Watershed Development Program. This is a program the government of India started about 10 years ago, and they have now changed the guidelines. So what the Institute wanted to do is figure out the impacts of the particular program with these new guidelines. So the question is, what is a watershed? And that's primarily what the farmers wanted to know themselves. Well, it's a geographic area where water drains to a common point. And so it's a great unit of measure for the technical side to figure out if you can conserve or how well you can conserve water and soil. So it's actually a strategy for protecting the livelihoods of farmers in fragile ecosystems. And what that means is places in semi-arid and arid regions where there's lots of runoff and there's not much water. One of the biggest things the guidelines changed in the program is that they wanted to infuse more of a integrated rural development, interdisciplinary program, meaning that they wanted the farmers to get involved, as well as they wanted a bigger interdisciplinary way of measuring the program. Economists come to the table, hydrologists come to the table, as well as other trades. So when we got out there, what we wanted to do was look at things on 3 different levels. We wanted to look at it from a household level, a farm level, as well as a watershed level. And so we went out there and we did quite a bit of farmer interviews for about 7 weeks, 7-8 weeks. And I looked at the nexus between the farm and the watershed levels. So I was out there talking to the farmers about what crops they were growing in the past 5 years, knowing that the monsoon seasons have gotten shorter and shorter over those years. What was interesting is that the farmers would pull me aside and say, look, the biggest thing is that we're out here and we only know how to grow 5 crops because that's what we learned before we got displaced. And unfortunately, these crops don't grow as well in these soils. And so the biggest thing that they want in these programs is education, what else we can grow, what can we do with the shorter rainy season, what do we do when it's the drier season? And the answer to them, for them, is to become laborers. And so they go to the cities and become laborers. So they want to be able to extend their growing season as well as have this program work for them. One of the biggest things I did was I went out there and I did a spatial distribution of their withdrawal, their groundwater withdrawal. And a lot of this was not done technically, it was done by their sense of how much they've withdrawn. So what we were trying to do is infuse more of a community participation of what was happening in their particular land. So what was one of the biggest things I want to mention here is we were able to use new technologies such as geographic information systems. And what was nice is this is straight out of our PRP from last year, using various statistics and looking at land use changes based on the shortage of rainfall. We wanted to talk to farmers. They got to look at the GIS a little bit. And the next step here is to actually bring in, little by little, technology for them, having GPS in their households now, and then they can figure out, okay, I need a well here, or I would really like to have a little what they call a check dam here so that we can collect water and mud for our rice for the next season. We also wanted to look at integrated planning for what they're calling treatments. So a watershed development treatment is to go around and say, I'd like to have what they're calling a bund. So a bund, what that does for them is that collects water and then filtrates out silt and other things so that they can grow their 5 main crops. And their 5 main crops are rice, corn, and 3 certain grains that they grow just in India. So, and I was very lucky that the Institute was able to send me to New Delhi to a policy meeting. Basically, it was a meeting on the methodological issues in assessing the impact of these watershed development programs. And like I said, with the new guidelines, it was really interesting to hear what they feel works and what they feel doesn't work. And it was essentially a dialogue to develop common indicators on evaluating these impacts. So it was we looked at methodology for monitoring mechanisms of the development and the policy themselves, as well as the institutional issues of watershed development. How do we want to work on governing these development programs? Who's going to look at them? What certain NGOs want to go in there and help them out? And like I said, I was really fortunate in this particular internship to be out there on the ground talking to the farmers, as well as doing lots and lots of policy research with the Institute, as well as being able to go to the meetings themselves and look at what research we were actually doing. So I really want to thank you, Ms. Crook, for allowing us to have this opportunity.
Yeah, let me go to the question of coordination. Several of you alluded to this, and a couple of you had an opportunity to work both in the field and in the capitals in Guatemala City or in Delhi. So with a sort of explosion of development NGOs, both in donor countries and indigenous NGOs, the problem of coordination gets really complicated. So I wonder if some of you could comment about maybe examples where coordination actually worked up to a point, and if so, how it worked, or where coordination really was needed but wasn't there, and maybe some reflections on how it might, in an ideal world, have been accomplished.
I'll start with this. We had a local partner that Amy mentioned called Multi-Credit that worked. They did sort of the more administrative side of loan distribution. We had, I think that with Multi-Credit working with Discover Hope Fund, I think that it was really a success case in terms of coordination. We had weekly meetings with our partners, and I think in general we just had really good communication. Communication just was key across the board. I know with regard to the computer classes, in some instances there were complaints about the system that we'd set up for fees for the class, and we had students complain about that, and then actually the same students would go and tell the local partner, well, I complained about that to DHF, but actually I'm learning so much from the class that I really don't care about this fee problem. And so that was very nice to hear, and I think without the sort of communication with our partner, we wouldn't have got the sort of hands-on information that we were getting.
I can speak a little too on the kind of smaller level of just at the organizational level. It was a huge problem to have multiple donors as a very small organization, because you just don't have enough people to be communicating with everyone and trying to tie things together, especially when the donor organizations have very different methodologies and ways of working with you. So you have one group that gives a lot of accompaniment and a lot of support and hand-holding, and another that just kind of throws you out there. And that's very difficult for a small organization to deal with, and it takes up a lot of time. And takes away, in our case anyways, it took away from the more substantive work that we could have done trying to deal with those issues. And that's something that we talk about in classes and stuff, and it was important for me to see that on a first-hand level, and try and think about ways that this could be better next time around. It's always not enough time to really figure it all out, but it was definitely something that I want to, working with this organization again on a continuous basis, try and figure out methods of making this more smooth and just take less time from the actual meat and substance of the organization.
From a bigger level, the Institute is part of a consortium of social science institutes. So what's nice about that is it's a lot easier to work with various nonprofits and NGOs that are just based in India, but that are based outside of India as well. So that was great because you could call on expertise come in, whether that would be, whether it be soil and water issues, or whether that would actually be, community participation issues or things of that nature. But it was really nice working within an institute, so you have those resources.
Also in Kenya, for very small library initiatives, lots of community-based libraries, which might be the size of this room, we found we're having trouble activating a lot of resources that were available in Kenya, offered by aid organizations or places like UNESCO, which offer training for librarians or major technological resources, but they won't offer them unless you can get together 50 librarians to actually make use of these programs. So in making and actually developing collaborations and coordination activities among small libraries, they made it a lot easier to activate resources that were available to them.
Would the work benefit from more interaction with international institutions and state institutions like USAID? And what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, my organization has an explicit focus to include government organizations, both local and national level organizations. Government organizations, just under the assumption that my organization is not going to either fund any of these projects or doesn't have the ability to either. And at some point, the government is going to have to take over and manage what we normally expect as a government service, libraries. I just don't think it's realistic to expect a completely separate organization to just take over in managing if they haven't had the opportunity to actually actively participate in decisions. And I mean, it's the community-based organizations in the government, municipalities that are going to be able to say what's realistic and practical in their communities. So although there are so many international nonprofit organizations working on libraries in Kenya, I think it's a mistake to exclude the governments, even if especially in Kenya, there's a huge problem with transparency and corruption, and a huge mistrust between levels of government on whether funds can be managed properly, and all sorts of different concerns. But that's development, I guess.
Yes, thank you for the presentations. All your projects sound great. I'm interested in how you assess your success or your social impact that you had. Do you identify objectives up front, and do you have quantifiable measures that you assess at the end to show what you actually accomplished in a short period of time?
Are you talking just on the personal level, or how did the organization?
Well, you have your project defined, and so I think you have an idea of what a successful project would be. So at the end of your project, when you look back, you say, I know I was successful because, and that's what I'm interested in, your social impact measurement.
Yeah, well, I'll speak to that a little bit, because the project I was working on was research to assess how this organization's doing, how Finca International is doing. And if it's people are real hesitant to talk about social impact of NGOs nowadays, because they get criticized by a lot of academics who say, oh, to assess impact you need to have this really good research method and a control group and all that. So while there's this push to assess social impact, it's really difficult and really expensive for these small NGOs. So that's one thing that's going on out there in the NGO world, which is good. People are saying you have to be accountable to see if what you're doing has an effect. But on the other side, there's a big expense for organizations that don't have much money. But personally, for my summer project, it was easy to assess because I had a certain number of interviews to do. I had a defined project, and so personally, it was easy to know when I was done with that, when I was finished.
I think it's appropriate that we give Ms. Crook the last question and the final word. So,
first, I wanted to ask Ariel, what is the literacy rate? When you're dealing with libraries, how many people?
It's low, and it differs across cities and rural populations. In Busia town, it could be as low as 40%, but it depends on where you're measuring too. So if you're measuring in school systems, it can be much haigher than that. But once people leave schools, if they're not in professionalized jobs, they might lose literacy, which happens fairly often.
And then I wanted to ask the three of you who were involved with microfinance, Amy, I think, and Pace and Blake, where the funds come from. I didn't understand the source of the funds that you're using for I mean, I've worked with various microfinance agencies here, and some operate with grants, some operate with individual donations, some foundations, and so forth.
So for Discover Hope Fund, it is a combination of grants and donors, mostly in the United States. This is an Austin-based organization. We actually have a donor event on this Saturday to raise more funds, and so most of it comes from here.
And it's the same for Finca. It's a combination of international donors, and then also they have some larger grants. But I mean, of course, the hope with microfinance is that you get these grants and donations to be your working capital, but of course you're able to cover expenses by giving loans and getting those back with interest. So
You try to come out with a bottom line that's even.
yeah. So yeah.
I wonder if you had any final words of wisdom for us and for the students.
Oh, listen, you just can't imagine how great. I'd like to be doing what every one of you are doing. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for making this possible, and thank you to the students for their just the remarkable work they did this summer. Please join me in thanking them.